Hello, this is Brian, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 21st issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Donald Trump orders new 50% tariffs on many Canadian imports. U.S. President Donald Trump ordered new 50% tariffs Monday on a wide range of Canadian imports that will apply to goods covered by the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, escalating a trade dispute the White House says stems from Canada's policies targeting American auto, dairy, and alcohol. The Trump administration justified its move by pointing to decisions from most Canadian provinces to halt the sale of American booze, long-standing irritants over Canada's treatment of U.S. dairy, and Canada's retaliation against U.S. auto tariffs. Today, President Trump took decisive action to hold Canada accountable for its retaliation and discrimination, delivering on his promise to correct trade imbalances and ensure fairness for American workers, farmers, and businesses, United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer wrote in a statement. The tariffs are being imposed under Section 338 of the Great Depression-era Tariff Act of 1930, a nearly century-old provision that allows the President to impose tariffs of up to 50% on imports from countries that discriminate against U.S. commerce. A background document from Greer's office notes that the new tariffs will be imposed on roughly $20 billion in Canadian imports and will come into effect in 30 days. These are defensive measures by the United States taken to remedy discriminatory actions by Canada, a senior U.S. official told reporters Monday afternoon on a background basis, noting that Section 338 had never before been invoked for such a purpose. The official said the tariffs would cover products ranging from wine to hockey sticks to cement, with the full list targeting a number of Canadian industries like alcohol, forestry and wood products, furniture, paper, agriculture, consumer goods, and specific goods run the gamut from beer to brandy, milk to molasses, honey to flower bulbs, and glassware to wigs. The tariffs will apply to CUSMA-compliant goods, with the official adding that energy, potash, fish, and critical minerals would be exempt. In a statement issued late Monday, Prime Minister Mark Carney backed Canada's handling of the trade spat thus far. This is the latest in a series of unilateral U.S. trade actions that began with the U.S. imposing a series of tariffs in direct violation of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA, the free trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The Prime Minister's statement read, "These include tariffs on the Canadian auto sector in violation of CUSMA. Canada, as its right, has merely matched those measures. This trade dispute has raised costs for families, particularly in the U.S. Canada stands ready to engage intensively to address outstanding issues with the U.S. to the mutual benefit of our citizens." Earlier in the day at Queen's Park, Premier Doug Ford had urged Carney to retaliate against the latest trade threat. "I'll never stop fighting to protect Ontario. If these tariffs proceed, Canada should respond tariff for tariff, dollar for dollar," Ford said in a statement moments after the president's announcement. Since April 2025, Canada has imposed a 25% tariff on American cars in retaliation for tariffs the Trump administration first imposed on Canadian-made vehicles. Companies that manufacture vehicles in Canada can apply for some tariff relief under the tariff rules. Except for Alberta and Saskatchewan, all Canadian provinces have restricted the sale of American alcohol, pulling everything from California wines to bourbon off the shelves at an immense cost to American producers. In the proclamation Trump signed on Monday, the White House estimated that the value of U.S. alcohol imports into Canada fell from approximately $718 million in the year before the ban to approximately $137 million in the year after most provinces pulled the products. The move comes 3 weeks after the Trump administration said it would not extend CUSMA in its current form. The latest turn in the ongoing conflict prompted multiple business groups and trade experts on Monday to frame the move as a costly development that shifts the dispute into new territory. The head of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce blasted Trump's move, saying it would hurt businesses and consumers on both sides of the border. This is another needless, reckless escalation in Trump's unilateral trade war. Canadian and American businesses alike are tired of this endless cycle of threats, retaliation, and uncertainty, said OCC CEO Daniel Tisch. For Ontario and Canada, this moment calls for calm, resolve, patience, and persistence. In the next 30 days and beyond, we must stand up for our businesses while pursuing a negotiated and durable resolution. Matthew Holmes, the head of government policy for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, said that month-long timeline creates a potential off-ramp. It also offers both sides a 30-day window to make meaningful progress on formal talks where all these issues can be discussed at the negotiating table, Holmes said. When asked Monday what the U.S. would need to see to walk back its newest tariffs, the U.S. official only said that Trump was taking this one step at a time. The latest escalation follows Trump's separate threat last week to impose tariffs linked to Canadian wildfire smoke, although U.S. officials said Monday those measures are being considered separately. The president's decision to target Canada with Section 338 tariffs, meanwhile, marks a significant escalation in the country's trade war, said veteran international trade lawyer John Boscariol. This is very serious, said Boscariol, head of the trade law group at McCarthy Tétrault. The U.S. administration has put its mind to targeting goods originating under CUSMA. I think we all got used to CUSMA being an exemption. But Flavio Volpe, the head of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, said Canada should refrain from panic. They are trying new avenues to be able to target specific countries with tariffs, Volpe said. The American justification for these ones, though, are Canadian counter tariffs to the original American ones. All is fair and in love and war, even if it's based on nonsense. Attacks between U.S. and Iran across Mideast overshadow efforts to keep diplomacy alive. A 10th straight day of attacks between the United States and Iran across the Middle East on Tuesday overshadowed diplomatic efforts in Pakistan to salvage an interim ceasefire deal that collapsed earlier this month as the two countries battled for control of a waterway vital to world energy supplies. Iranian Interior Minister Iskandar Momemi visited Pakistan, a key mediator in the conflict that is seeking to rejuvenate diplomacy, but it was unclear what new arrangement might be reached to end the war. Speaking from the Oval Office, U.S. President Donald Trump gave a dim view on possible talks, saying the U.S. had no interest in meeting. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has largely stalled, and as the fight for control over the waterway intensifies, both sides have targeted civilian infrastructure in the region relied on by millions of people. A barrage of U.S. strikes hasn't compelled Tehran to loosen its grip on the strait, through which about 1/5 of the world's crude oil and natural gas was shipped before the war. The U.S. continued its airstrikes on the Islamic Republic early Tuesday, and Iran attacked a tanker in the strait, forcing the crew to abandon the ship. Iran also kept up attacks against U.S. allies in the region. Sirens in Bahrain and Kuwait warned residents on Tuesday afternoon of incoming projectiles. In the Red Sea, Iran-backed Houthi rebels have opened a new front against Saudi Arabia by declaring a naval blockade of the kingdom, threatening the flow of global oil supplies and trade. With the Strait of Hormuz blocked up, Saudi Arabia has been relying on a pipeline to the Red Sea to get millions of barrels of oil out to market. A news agency in Yemen that is run by the Houthis, Saba, said Tuesday that 6 ships in the Red Sea were forced to reroute after they received warnings from the rebel group. The Associated Press could not immediately confirm the claim. 3 Houthi officials said the group warned international shipping companies on Monday to avoid transiting in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the gateway to the Red Sea at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. The officials spoke on condition of anonymity, saying they weren't authorized to speak to journalists. The escalation has pushed oil prices higher. Benchmark Brent crude traded Tuesday above $90 a barrel, and regular gasoline in the U.S. climbed to an average of $4 a gallon, keeping pressure on Americans' wallets ahead of midterm elections this fall. Iranian officials begin meetings in Pakistan. Khomeini met Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, according to 2 officials who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the closed-door negotiations. Khomeini later met Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. In a statement, Sharif expressed deep concern over the recent escalation between the U.S. and Iran, and he urged all sides to exercise restraint and avoid actions that could further destabilize the region. Pakistan's political leadership and Munir, who serves as both the Chief of Army Staff and Defense Forces, played a key role in brokering last month's interim agreement between the United States and Iran. Islamabad has been working to persuade both sides to return to the negotiating table to resolve outstanding issues under the June Memorandum of Understanding. Trump told reporters that Iranian officials want to desperately meet, and until they're ready to meet in a meaningful way, we have no interest in meeting. He added that Iran was getting decimated by U.S. attacks. A deep level of mistrust persists on both sides. Iran came under a surprise attack in June 2025 and again in February, while it was engaging in nuclear negotiations with the U.S. The interim deal unraveled when Iran resumed attacks on ships in the Strait of Hormuz, which was supposed to be reopened under the agreement. U.S. strikes come as ships attacked. The U.S. Military Central Command said Tuesday it targeted Iranian military command centers, maritime capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and air defense systems. It released more footage of bombings that targeted sites in Iran. American forces remain postured and prepared to hold Iran accountable for unwarranted aggression toward civilian mariners seeking to freely and openly transit the strait, the command said. Iranian state media reported that explosions were heard in Fars, Hormozgan, Elam, Kerman, and Sistan, and Baluchistan provinces. The British military's United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center said a tanker came under attack early Tuesday in the Strait of Oman, forcing the crew to abandon the vessel. Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard claimed the attack, as well as 2 other attacks on ships Monday in the waterway. The route around Oman has been the one the U.S. military has encouraged ships to travel to avoid Iran's control. Iran strikes U.S. allies around the region. Tehran also hit U.S. allied countries throughout the Middle East. Jordan's military said Tuesday that Iran targeted it with 5 drones and 3 missiles, all of which were shot down. Bahrain sounded its missile alert sirens Tuesday afternoon as another Iranian barrage targeted the island kingdom, which is home to the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. The Kuwaiti government said Iran had struck desalination and power plants for a 4th straight day on Monday night. Authorities said the attacks sparked fires and caused damage. Some 90% of Kuwait's drinking water comes from desalination, making the attacks a matter of life and death for the tiny nation. U.S. strikes have been hitting electrical equipment in Iran as well, and Iranian officials also have said Americans targeted water facilities. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Lebanon's president meets with Trump in Washington to push for Israeli troop withdrawal. Lebanon's president is meeting with President Donald Trump on Tuesday to wrap up a 4-day visit to Washington in a bid for long-term calm after months of war at home between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah militant group. Joseph Aoun's first ever meeting with his U.S. counterpart comes as Lebanon and Israel hold rare direct talks mediated by Washington. This is the first White House visit by a Lebanese president since 2009. Trump shook hands with Aoun on the White House driveway and called him highly respected. Neither answered reporters' shouted questions about Lebanon and Israel, with Trump instead pointing inside before leading Aoun that way. Moments later, Trump invited reporters into the pair's Oval Office meeting that had originally been listed as closed to the press. Lebanon hopes the talks will result in Israeli troops withdrawing from large swaths of southern Lebanon that they currently occupy, and the Lebanese military receiving support to assert full control in areas where Hezbollah militants had held sway. Lebanon and Israel announced a framework agreement on June 26th, setting a plan for Israeli forces to withdraw and for the disarmament of Hezbollah, which for decades had a strong presence in southern Lebanon. It also lays out steps toward an eventual peace agreement between the countries, which have never held formal diplomatic ties and have been nominally in a state of war for nearly 80 years after Israel's establishment. The State Department announced Monday that operations in 3 villages deemed part of a pilot zone had begun, without giving details. 2 of the villages, Frun and Rifa, are not under Israeli military control, and the Lebanese army is present, while Israeli forces are in part of Zatar al-Gharbeh. The Lebanese army, in a statement, said it was preparing for Israel to withdraw from Zatar al-Gharbeh and that it had begun deploying troops Tuesday. The Israeli military said it will adjust its force posture in one of the pilot areas in order to enable the Lebanese armed forces to carry out their mission, without specifying the location. The Lebanese military later said Israeli troops fired near that area in Zatar al-Gharbeh without giving details, and warned it could delay deployment. An Israeli military official, speaking on condition of anonymity in accordance with military guidelines, said the withdrawal had not yet begun. Village mayor waits for safety to be confirmed. Abed Ezzeldine, mayor of Zatar al-Gharbeh, said they were waiting for the Lebanese military to say whether it's safe for residents to check on their homes after they fully deploy and patrol the area. He was concerned about safety, given that the Israeli military is still present in a village next door, while Israeli strikes continue nearby. The villages are intertwined, so we don't feel safe because the Israelis are present there. They're on our borders and are not very far from us, Ezzeldine told the Associated Press, who said Zatar al-Gharbeh is uninhabitable. Once the army gives us permission to enter Zatar al-Gharbeh, we as civilians will go in, but only to check it out and see how things are, and then we will leave, he said. We can't stay because the infrastructure is completely damaged and houses have been leveled. They, the Israelis, have bulldozed the roads. The Lebanese military last week increased its presence in some of the areas expected to be included in the pilot zone, including the 3 villages with troops patrolling and setting up checkpoints. Rubio says U.S. will support the framework agreement. Aoun on Sunday met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who said Washington will continue to endorse the Lebanese agreement and support its full implementation. Rubio described the meeting as very positive and warned that Lebanon will never be fully at peace as long as the Hezbollah issue is not resolved. How do you replace Hezbollah? You defeat and replace them with a government that is strong enough to be the sole force of arms in the country, Rubio said. Skeptics in Lebanon fear that a military confrontation with Hezbollah could lead to a civil war. Government officials have urged investment in the country's battered infrastructure to empower the weakened state, which Rubio echoed. This is not just about military stuff, he said. This is about how can we attract more U.S. and international investment into Lebanon. Israel plans on a long-term presence. Israeli officials, meanwhile, have said they plan to keep military forces long-term in a security zone in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has dismissed the U.S.-brokered direct talks and instead backed Washington's talks with its key ally and patron, Iran, to end their war, which includes ending the war in Lebanon as a condition. Lebanon's government came to power on a reformist platform in early 2025, vowing to disarm all non-state groups, including Hezbollah. It blames Hezbollah for dragging the country into another war with Israel in March, when the militant group fired several rockets toward northern Israel 2 days after the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran. Beirut's leadership, however, has condemned Israel's subsequent ground invasion and massive aerial campaign in the country, which has killed over 4,000 people and displaced 1.2 million others. While grappling with stark political opposition from Hezbollah and allies within the deeply divided country, Lebanon's leadership insists that Israeli withdrawal and international financial support for Lebanon's cash-strapped army is crucial for a sustainable security solution. U.S. actions harm global efforts to prevent and treat HIV in dozens of countries, new report says. The Trump administration's disruptions to a global AIDS relief program have forced organizations to close clinics, lay off staff, and cut services, seriously impeding efforts to prevent and treat the disease in dozens of countries, a new report released Tuesday shows. The President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, known as PEPFAR, is credited with saving at least 26 million lives since its inception in 2003. But last year, it was impaired by the dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development and cuts to thousands of global health grants. The disruptions were very widespread, with services for young women, orphans, and children impacted, said Elise Lankowitz, policy associate for the nonprofit AMFAR, the Foundation for AIDS Research, which released the report. Researchers contacted groups that got PEPFAR funding to deliver HIV services last year. Nearly a quarter, 166 groups from 46 countries, responded to an electronic survey conducted between last November and April, providing information on their funding, staff, and services. The survey didn't reach all PEPFAR groups, and certain types of organizations, like those that were most severely disrupted or still receiving U.S. funding, may have been less likely to respond. That could result in an underestimate or an overestimate of disruptions, depending on which organizations were missed. Nevertheless, the findings are a window into the struggles that some groups faced last year. Some key findings were most organizations had at least one award terminated or payment delayed last year. Terminations led to the closure of more than 1,700 clinics, drop-in centers, and other service delivery sites, and to the loss of more than 16,000 full-time staff members. Even though the U.S. government directed services providing HIV treatment, testing, and prevention of mother-to-child transmission to continue, a majority of partners still reported a disruption to those services. Cuts were concentrated on services for populations most impacted by HIV. Most organizations previously serving groups such as sex workers, men who have sex with men, transgender people, and people who inject drugs reported permanently ending a service for these groups. Even among organizations that didn't lose funding, some reported stopping a service for one of these key populations to comply with U.S. policy. HIV prevention has been sharply reduced, with many organizations stopping condom programs or services offering what's called PrEP, preventive medicines to guard against sexually transmitted HIV. From fiscal years 2024 to 2025, prevention spending fell 51%, according to PEPFAR expenditure data. Locally based partners were much more likely than international organizations to have an award terminated and to close service delivery sites. Funding disruptions also destabilize interconnected HIV service systems. Taken together, these results describe widespread degradation of the infrastructure built to deliver HIV services worldwide, with the deepest damage falling on the populations and partners most essential to controlling the epidemic, the report says. The survey doesn't provide data at the country level, but AMFAR officials point out that the majority of responses came from African countries. When asked about the report, a State Department spokesperson said in an email that the Trump administration has strengthened PEPFAR through clear strategic direction. As a result, the number of children testing positive and on treatment for HIV has continued to decline, the spokesperson said. In April, the U.S. State Department released PEPFAR data for one quarter in 2025, July through September. Officials said PEPFAR-supported programs provided standard HIV treatment for 20.6 million people in more than 50 countries, which they said is stable from the same reporting period in 2024. They also said PEPFAR started 103,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women on PrEP, up from 43,000 the previous year. The data from that quarter demonstrates the resilience and strength of the program, the spokesperson said. But researchers from AMFAR and the International AIDS Society combined that quarter's data with another data release that included all 4 quarters and found substantial disruptions across PEPFAR services. Other research published in the journal Nature Health in June specifically examined treatment globally using PEPFAR data. It found that nearly 2 million fewer people living with HIV were receiving PEPFAR-supported antiretroviral treatment in fiscal year 2025 as compared with the previous fiscal year, about a 10% decline. That does raise really important questions about program stability, said Ramona Godbold, an author of that study who wasn't involved in the latest report. AMFAR's report made numerous recommendations to help restore care. It said the U.S. government and PEPFAR leaders should reinstate support for all HIV services, not just treatment. It also called on other national governments to spend more on HIV services and contract with non-governmental organizations, including those led by people in key vulnerable populations. But Jennifer Sherwood, AMFAR's Director of Research and Public Policy, said even if money is put back into the system, it will take time to get the services up and running and regain the trust of communities. And unfortunately, with HIV, an infectious disease, each day is deadly, she said. Each day that we don't have those systems in place, you see new infections. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Smithsonian History Museum chief rejects White House criticism of its leaders as radical activists. The director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History pushed back on Tuesday against a recent White House report that branded the institution's leadership as radical activists who cannot be trusted. As we continue to fact-check the report, we unwaveringly attest that it does not fairly or accurately characterize the full body of work at the museum, Director Anthea M. Hartig told a House Oversight Subcommittee. There is always room for improvement, but I also know the beauty and the inspiration and the expertise that lies in our collections, our exhibits, and our programming. Coinciding with the 250th anniversary of American independence, the White House Domestic Policy Council released a report on July 4th arguing that the museum, a centerpiece of the sprawling Smithsonian complex on the National Mall, doesn't tell history in a way that is inspiring, unifying, and worthy of our great republic. The report reflects a broader effort by President Donald Trump and his supporters to use the power of the federal government to reshape the way the nation's history is told, often de-emphasizing the role of slavery and racism, along with stories about LGBTQ and other marginalized communities. Republicans on the panel reiterated some of those concerns on Tuesday. In the museum's current telling, history is just an ongoing power struggle between oppressors and the oppressed, said Representative Tim Burchett, Republican, Tennessee. The report makes clear that the museum's woke exhibits and materials reflect a broader view held by the museum leadership. Hartig, the first woman to serve as director of the National Museum of American History, said the institution does not take sides in American political debates. She described the museum's presentation of the nation's story as an evolution intended to add voices, not erase history, as detractors sometimes argue. When historians talk about reframing a traditional narrative, we don't mean erasing it, she said. We mean adding the evidence, the voices, the objects that earlier tellings left out, so that more Americans can see themselves reflected in the national story. Trump administration opens investigation into Harvard's financial aid for international students. The Justice Department is investigating whether Harvard University is allowing Chinese donors to create scholarships that exclude American students, adding to the barrage of federal inquiries the Trump administration has opened in its battle against the Ivy League school. Justice Department officials announced the new review Monday, saying Harvard's foreign funding disclosures raised concerns about possible discrimination against U.S. students. The agency did not specify which scholarship programs are being targeted and emphasized it has not reached any conclusions. The investigation is aimed at Harvard's China-based financial aid programs, the Justice Department said. The agency said Chinese donors have given money to Harvard to support financial aid programs limited to students from certain countries. That restriction could amount to illegal discrimination based on country of origin, the department said. Schools cannot take federal dollars and then turn around and accept money from foreign sources to give financial aid that deliberately excludes American citizens. Doing so is illegal, and we will stop it wherever we find it, said Harmeet Dillon, who leads the department's Civil Rights Division. Harvard said it was reviewing the Justice Department notice. Harvard follows the law for required reporting of donations and, consistent with our legal obligations under Title VI, does not unlawfully discriminate on the basis of race, ethnicity, or national origin in allocating financial aid, the university said in a written statement. In a statement, Lu Chang, a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington, said China-U.S. education cooperation is mutually beneficial. China maintains that normal education and academic exchange should not be disrupted for political purposes, Lu said. Like many U.S. universities, Harvard accepts foreign funding through direct donations or contracts. The Trump administration has pushed for greater transparency around outside money, warning that accepting funding from foreign adversaries is a national security risk. Federal disclosures from Harvard show it has accepted $630 million from Chinese sources over a period of decades. Overall, it has reported about $4.5 billion in federal funding. The Justice Department cited those figures but did not single out any donors or programs being reviewed. The investigation is a compliance review, meaning it's initiated by the federal government rather than responding to an outside complaint. Unlike the vast majority of U.S. universities, Harvard and a small number of other schools provide need-based scholarships to international students on the same basis as U.S. students. Grants and other aid from the federal government are reserved for American students, but Harvard has its own job and scholarship money available to foreign students, according to a Harvard financial aid website. In some cases, foreign donors have given money to be used for international students. In 2014, Pan Shi and Zhang Jin, a Chinese couple that co-founded the real estate company Soho China, donated $15 million to Harvard to provide financial aid for Chinese students. Their gift drew blowback from critics in China, who said it was a betrayal to give money to foreign schools instead of Chinese universities. The Justice Department's announcement makes the unusual legal argument that steering private funding to students of certain countries amounts to a civil rights violation for U.S. students. Harvard appears to be accepting these funds and, in adherence to their restriction, providing student financial aid to foreign students, presumably Chinese, based on their national origin, to the potential detriment of students of other national origins, including American citizens, the agency said. The Trump administration has repeatedly opened new federal investigations against Harvard in its battle to win obedience from the nation's oldest university. Harvard has been a prime target in the administration's push to end wokeness and fight alleged anti-Semitism in American higher education. A federal judge has blocked the White House from cutting billions of dollars in federal research funding from Harvard amid the feud. Even as the legal battle continues, the government has sought new lines of attack, seeking to limit Harvard's ability to enroll foreign students and U.S. military members, and launching investigations into the school's admissions process. Conflicts and energy shocks threaten progress against global hunger, UN agency head warns. Conflicts and disruptions to global energy markets could push millions more people into hunger by driving up fuel, fertilizer, and food costs, the head of the Rome-based International Fund for Agricultural Development warned, as a new United Nations report showed global progress against hunger remains fragile. The UN Food Security Report, released Tuesday, found global hunger has eased modestly in recent years, but projected more than 500 million people could still face chronic hunger by 2030. Africa is expected to bear the largest share of that burden. In an interview with the Associated Press on July 10th, IFAD President Alvaro Lario said geopolitical tensions and potential disruptions to shipping and energy supplies, including uncertainties surrounding the Strait of Hormuz during the Iran war, could leave an additional 9 to 18 million people facing hunger if the shocks persist. We are in a current era where we have the highest number of conflicts and are still increasing, Lario said. Whenever there is conflict, also hunger, displacement, refugees increase. Conflict fuels food insecurity. Conflict remains one of the biggest obstacles to reducing hunger worldwide, Lario added. Wars and geopolitical tensions can disrupt shipping, energy supplies, and agricultural inputs, increasing costs across food systems already strained by inflation. Lario stressed that hunger and conflict often reinforce one another, creating a cycle that is difficult to break without greater stability. Higher energy prices are already affecting fertilizers and agricultural production, he said. The impact is especially significant for small-scale farmers, many of whom rely on diesel fuel to pump water, harvest crops, and transport goods to market. Rising fuel costs increase production expenses and can feed directly into higher food prices. Climate shocks add pressure. The new report identifies affordability as one of the world's biggest food security challenges. While food production continues to grow, roughly a third of the global population still can't afford a healthy diet. In low-income countries, that figure rises to about 77%, according to Lario. The biggest challenge is no longer simply producing enough food, but making healthy diets affordable, he said. Climate change is adding further pressure to food systems and rural livelihoods. Lario noted that floods, prolonged droughts, and extreme heat are increasingly disrupting agriculture around the world and have become a common reality for many communities. Governments should focus on resilience and adaptation before disasters strike, rather than relying solely on emergency responses afterward, he said. This is just becoming the new normal, Lario said. We are seeing floods in many countries. We're still seeing droughts that have been expanding for 4 or 5 years. The fund is increasing investments in climate adaptation programs aimed at helping rural communities withstand floods, droughts, and extreme heat, he said, arguing that support is urgently needed for the millions of small farmers who produce much of the world's food. Africa emerges as the epicenter. The report highlights Africa as the world's most pressing food security challenge. For the first time, the continent has overtaken Asia as the region with the largest number of hungry people, and nearly 60% of the world's chronically undernourished people could live there by 2030. Lario attributed the shift partly to rapid population growth and slower economic gains than in parts of Asia, and he called for greater investment in agriculture, infrastructure, and food systems. African countries currently import nearly $100 billion worth of food each year, he said, underscoring the need for stronger local production, storage, distribution, and regional trade networks. Conflicts, energy market disruptions, and climate extremes threaten to derail progress unless governments invest in more resilient food systems, Lario said. Japan raises safety concern over Chinese destroyers' live-fire drills. Japan expressed concern after a Chinese Navy destroyer conducted live-fire drills off a remote Japanese island in the Pacific Ocean on Sunday during its joint exercise with Russia, officials said Tuesday. The Chinese Liang 3 class guided missile destroyer conducted a live-fire exercise off Japan's southernmost island of Okinotori hours after the Japanese Navy spotted it operating alongside 2 other Chinese warships and a Russian frigate, the Japanese Joint Staff said. Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara told reporters Tuesday that his government conveyed concerns that the live-fire drills posed a potential safety threat to nearby vessels. He noted that ships near this area received a notice from the Chinese warships just before the drills started. We will continue to watch China-Russia operations around Japan with concern, while doing utmost for the warning and surveillance of the Japanese airspace and territorial waters, Kihara said. Japanese Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi, in a speech Monday in Britain, said the action underscored the deepening military cooperation between China and Russia, as he also noted China's ballistic missile launch from a submarine earlier this month, and at least 10 joint flights conducted by Chinese and Russian bombers around Japan. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Wen accused Japan of playing up external threats to justify its military buildup. Japan's so-called concern is actually groundless, and China has firmly refuted it, he said at a regular briefing in Beijing. Japan has been alarmed by China's rapid expansion of operations in the Pacific, especially since 2 Chinese aircraft carriers were spotted last year almost simultaneously operating near another southern Japanese island, Iwo Jima, for the first time, fueling Tokyo's concern about Beijing's military activity far beyond its borders. Former Vice Defense Minister Masahisa Sato said he considers Sunday's live-fire drills as an early stage of China's so-called salami-slicing strategy of taking incremental steps to keep expanding its control without triggering border conflicts. China may intensify provocation by aircraft carriers around Okinotori, Sato commented on X, stressing the need to reinforce the Pacific Theater defense. Japan is also deeply concerned about growing joint military operations by China and Russia around Japan in recent years. Sunday's live-fire drills by the Chinese destroyer were conducted 110 miles southwest of the island and within Japan's exclusive economic zone, an area beyond its immediate territorial waters where the country has rights over natural resources. Lin disputed Japan's claim to an EEZ around Okinotori, saying it is a rock, not an island. Japan's claim to an EEZ based on Okinotori, Shima, violates international law, he said. The word Shima means island in Japanese. China has said previously that it wrapped up joint naval exercises with Russia on July 13th, and that some of the participating ships were conducting joint patrols in the Pacific. It wasn't clear why patrols would include live firing, as claimed by Japan. The live fire exercises were held off the port city of Qingdao on China's east coast, the country's official Xinhua news agency said. The area is far from the uninhabited Okinotori, which sits in the Philippine Sea. China-Russia military cooperation plays an important role in safeguarding the two nations' sovereignty and security and upholding international and regional peace and stability, China's Defense Ministry spokesperson Xing Bin said in remarks posted online late last week. We hope that relevant parties can view China-Russia military cooperation objectively and rationally and stop making groundless speculation and cease smearing and hyping, he said. Japan's joint staff said it was the first time it disclosed the detection of Chinese live-fire drills in the Japanese EEZ, though the action did not violate international law. The joint staff said the fleet of the same 4 Chinese and Russian warships had earlier sailed southward between the main Japanese islands of Okinawa and Miyako. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. International criminal groups use technology to expand in and beyond Asia, UN report says. Southeast Asia-based criminal groups are using increasingly integrated networks and technology to build a rapidly growing illicit economy with tentacles that reach far beyond Asia, with scams alone causing estimated combined losses of $88.3 billion to $114.1 billion in 2025, a UN report says. The report by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime outlines how transnational crime that used to be concentrated in Southeast Asia has expanded to other regions, while global criminal groups are increasingly engaging in drug, human, and wildlife trafficking in Asia. Criminals are using new technologies to launder money through global financial systems and using artificial intelligence to steal from victims worldwide, said the report released Tuesday. Children are increasingly at risk. One key finding of the report is the threat to children, both from AI and from online gaming, as hundreds of scam compounds scattered across Southeast Asia provide venues for sex trafficking and selling of child sexual abuse content. There is a huge jump in AI-generated child sexual images communicated through encrypted communications platforms, said Inshik Sim, UNODC researcher and coordinator for the report, told reporters at a briefing at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. East Asian crime syndicates are running businesses that use malware, generative AI, and deep fakes for sexual extortion and exploitation in a trend that increases risks of in-person abuse as well as live-streamed abuse and grooming of victims. Apart from outright trafficking for the sex industry, victims can be sold into domestic servitude, forced begging, and forced labor, among other forms of exploitation, the report says. Social media and online gaming and gambling also pose dangers for children, the report notes, citing surveys showing that hundreds of children and teens across Southeast Asia are engaged in online gambling, some to the extent of addiction. Trafficking in drugs, guns, tobacco, and wildlife is expanding. The report estimates the combined annual sales of illicit drugs in Southeast Asia and nearby countries at up to $109 billion, with seizures of illegal shipments soaring. That includes methamphetamines, heroin, and ketamine. It points to the Sulu-Celebes Maritime Triangle between Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines as an increasingly important corridor for shipments of cocaine from Latin America to Asia, with illicit cargoes sometimes embedded in legitimate shipments such as Chinese tea. The area is also often used for smuggling of wildlife and small arms, the report says. Meanwhile, Thailand and Vietnam increasingly are the source of cannabis sent to Japan, where it is illegal, and to Europe, it says. Earlier this year, authorities in Malaysia's Sabah seized more than 3 tons of methamphetamine, ketamine, and ecstasy, in the largest such seizure for Sabah so far. Money laundering and other tools keep criminals in business. The report outlines how cross-border financial and technology networks are supporting what it calls a criminal service infrastructure that facilitates global organized crime. The tools used include cryptocurrency, encrypted and private communications platforms, and generative AI to create convincing phishing content, deploy real-time deepfake videos and voice calls. Using AI-powered translations, they can target victims across many languages at the same time, the report says. Satellite communications also enable scam compounds to operate in places that are remote or subject to close surveillance. To counter this growing criminal ecosystem, authorities need a coordinated cross-border strategy that integrates enforcement across data, communications, and financial systems and online services and marketplaces, the report said. Crackdowns drive scam centers offshore and underground. As authorities in Thailand, China, and elsewhere have raided industrial-sized scam centers mostly located in border regions of Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, criminals have responded by shifting to other parts of the world or operating on a smaller scale. They were destroyed, but none of the operations stopped, said Sung Jae Shin, an analyst and counterterrorism office at the UNODC. Scam centers moved to villas and other properties, he said, going underground. It's much harder for the Cambodian authorities to crack down now, he said. Rescuers in Afghanistan search for scores missing after floods kill at least 23. Rescue crews in Afghanistan searched Tuesday for survivors and bodies in the rubble of houses destroyed by devastating flash floods that authorities said have killed at least 23 people and left more than 100 missing. The Afghanistan National Disaster Management Authority said Tuesday that 80 people also were injured when floods struck the eastern province of Nuristan on Monday, causing an undetermined number of buildings to collapse. The provincial capital city of Parun was among the areas affected, authorities said. Video footage from Parun showed scenes of utter devastation with piles of mud, rocks, and rubble where buildings used to be. Bulldozers helped clear mud and smash concrete while local residents used shovels to dig away at piles of earth. The flood came through here. We saw bodies being swept away in the flood waters with our own eyes, said Parun resident Zubair Ahmad, who said homes and shops were destroyed. The flooding caused extensive damage and heavy losses for the local people. Forecasters predicted more extreme weather with heavy rain, thunderstorms, strong winds, accompanied by sand and flash floods in 10 of the country's 34 provinces, the Ministry of Transport and Civil Aviation's Meteorology Department said Monday evening. The ministry warned residents to avoid riverbanks and other areas at risk of flooding. Afghanistan is highly vulnerable to extreme weather events with snow and heavy rain that trigger flash floods, often killing dozens or even hundreds of people at a time. In 2024, more than 300 people died in springtime flash floods. Earlier this year, at least 110 people were killed by widespread flooding and landslides in several parts of the country. Decades of conflict, along with poor infrastructure, a struggling economy, deforestation, and the intensifying effects of climate change have amplified the impact of such disasters, particularly in remote areas where many homes are built of mud and offer limited protection against sudden deluges or heavy snowfall. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 21st issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Brian. Thank you for listening.